Now, we are going to start using eSword, which is a wonderful tool that is free. So if you've got a computer in front of you, you might want to open it up now, eSword. No. Right.
Oh, you got eSword in there? Has he got it in there?
Okay. Right, if you go to Acts, in fact, you know what? Don't do it the first time. Just watch me what I do. I'm going to Acts 18:26. Okay, now this is a bit of a controversial one, but I picked a controversial one because one, it's a good example of checking a semantic range, and two, controversial ones will stick in your head. You know, so it should be fun. Right, check this out. I'm using the New American Standard Bible. And he began to speak out boldly in the synagogue. But when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. Now, you'll be familiar with this verse because it's a verse that's used often to argue a certain position. What's interesting is, even in books written on women leadership, no one really goes to the Greek. And I actually read a paper by Dan Wallace, who I mentioned a minute ago, and he's saying, even scrolling through the different commentaries, and no one really chats about it. He did a word study on it, which I was interested in because I'd already done a word study on it, and I was like, no one seems to do a word study on this. But here we got a verse, and you want to know, what does that mean? Some people might want to know what it means because they want to know, does it mean women can teach? Some people might want to know what it means because they want to know, does it mean I can tell people women can't teach? Now, it's important that we're not going to try and read our own personal doctrinal ideas into the text. What we're going to do is see what the text is saying, and we're not going to draw any conclusions in this lesson. I'm just going to show you the tools, okay? Now, what is the key word here that you would want to look up? Well, first, let me ask you, what's step one in doing a word search? If you look on your handouts. That's it, to find the word. So what's the word in this case? What's that? Explain, that's right. Okay, so watch what I'm doing. I'm clicking on the NASB with a plus sign on it. Now, if you want the NASB on eSword, it costs $10, I think. So, and you download it straight away. It's well worth it. Very good translation for studying the Greek. Most people argue that it's the closest word-for-word translation to the Greek. I've just heard it's $20. Sound like Peter Popoff now with my earpiece. 20. Right, okay, so I click on the one with a plus sign, and now I've got numbers next to it. Now, if you haven't got that, you can go to the King James Version with the plus sign, and you'll get the same thing. I'm going to go to my NASB, and this word explain, if I hover above the number next to it, which is 1620, I get this Greek word come up, ektithemi. Okay, and if I click on that, let me just go into this mode up here so we can see it at the bottom. Now I've got a dictionary at the bottom, and this is going to tell me about this word. Now, I found my word, ektithemi. What is the next step?
To understand its semantic range.
Semantic range. So we can do this with the New American Standard Concordance, or we can do it with Strong's. Now, you need to know Strong's isn't really a dictionary. What Strong's is the guy went through and found every time the King James translated a word a certain way. So it has its limitations, but it's also a very good tool, and it's amazing that Strong did that. Now, if you use the New American Standard one, you find you got more numbers because they basically discovered more manuscripts after the King James was written, and they found more words. So sometimes here in eSword, if you use the New American Standard, it will have a B at the end of the word because they couldn't fit it in. All the Strong's numbers are taken. So they put a B in, and you've got to manually type it in on your computer, which is a shame. But so we look up the semantic range, and we've got to set forth, to declare, and then it's got how it's translated in the NASB. One time it's explain, another time explain, then explaining, and one time it's set outside. Okay, if we go to Strong's here, we will get to expose, or figuratively to declare. And there's semantic range there. They've got it being used for cast out and used for expound. Okay. Now, if we go to Thayer's dictionary, and Thayer's dictionary is free with eSword, unfortunately, it's also one that people recommend not to use because it's old, and so just Thayer didn't know as much. There's also some etymology in there, but if you're really strapped for cash and you can't get one, you could use it, but just be careful about making your main authority on it. Check it with other commentaries, what you come up with. Now, he puts 3 words here, 3 explanations: to place or set out, to put outside or to expose, and secondly, to set up or to exhibit, and thirdly, metaphorically, to set forth, declare, or expound. Now, if we go to Zodi 80's word study, which you can buy for about $30, and this one here, he says to expose, to place out as an infant, to set forth, expound, expose oneself, declare. Okay, so we're getting 2 main explanations. One is to explain something, and the other is to set something out, to expose something. This is step 2. We found the semantic range. Now, if you look on your, I've just given you some lexicons, right? You should have the word ektithemi, and you've got the Bauer definition. It says BDAG on it. Right beneath where it says ektithemi. Now, this is the leading lexicon. You find any scholarly works, they quote this. Started by a German guy called Bauer, who's dead now. Not to be confused with the liberal Bauer, who came up with some funny ideas about archaeology in the Bible. Not him, it's another Bauer. This is an expensive book. If you buy it brand new, it's £100. You can get it second-hand on Amazon for about £30. It's about this fat. It's well worth it. That's why I've given you handouts of it so you can see the kind of definitions they give you. Now, if you look, his first definition, he says, withdraw support or protection from, to expose, to abandon. Okay? I find that a lot easier to understand than the definition we just looked at. Then number 2, his second definition is to convey information by careful elaboration, to explain, to expound. So we've got 2 different definitions there. Now, what is the next step of our word study? Compare the semantic range to the context. Wonderful. Right. I'm going to show you how to do this in eSword now. And we're going to do this without even going into a Greek text. Okay? What we do is we've got our word here explained. We've got the number right above it, 162. Now check this out. You right click on the number and then you get a pop-up window. And at the top it says quick search on 1620. What that means is it's going to do a search for when this Greek word that Strong's has numbered 1620 is found in the New Testament. Click on New Testament and it's just told me. It's given me these verses here. Notice they're all in the book of Acts. Now, this is the way it works, right? When you do a word study and you can compare it with the context, first thing you start off with is the immediate phrase. That's the first thing you look at. Then you look at the verse. If you need to, go out to the chapter. If you need to, go out to the book. Bear in mind that one author can use 2 different meanings in the same book for the same word. Then check the rest of the New Testament. Then if you have to, check out the Septuagint. But don't check out classical Greek. If you really know what you're doing, you can, but it's probably just not worth it. Okay, it was a few hundred years before, so it's not worth it. So we're going to do that in this case, right? I'm going to click on the verse we're at, which is Matthew 18:26, and then I say accept. Right, now, if you look at the top of the screen where the mouse is, it says Acts 18:26, and it's got an arrow to the right and an arrow to the left. Okay, so what we do, we look at our verse, and we see that Priscilla and Aquila hear this guy, Apollos, and they take him aside and they explain to him the way of God more accurately. Now, our semantic range has 2 meanings. So you ask yourself, in the context, which meaning is it most likely? Who thinks it means they exposed him? Right, okay. Who thinks it means they explained something to him, they expounded something to him? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And in this case, it's kind of an easy one in that you know that they're not chucking him out in the desert and exposing him in the way that it's used. Well, Maybe he is.
I mean, the only thing is because his understanding obviously was limited. So the only way that I could look at it and think they could possibly be exposing him, there was one of the statements said about like as an infant, set out as an infant, that they were actually kind of showing him, look, you don't really kind of know what you're talking about.
Right. Well, we see that because when we do this process, we see what that really means when they say expose.
Right.
It'll become clearer. So what I do now is I'm now going to see the next time this is used. So you see where my binoculars are at the top here? I click on this next arrow. And now we got Acts 28:23. When they had set a day for Paul, they came to him at his lodging in large numbers, and he was explaining to them by solemnly testifying about the kingdom of God and trying to persuade them concerning Jesus from both the law of Moses and the prophets from morning until evening. Okay. What we got going on here is Paul evangelizing, reasoning with people. Well, I shouldn't say that word. I'm going to read something into it that isn't there. He's explaining to them about the kingdom of God and explaining how Jesus is written about in the Old Testament scriptures. Okay, so he's not exposing people. He's not casting them out. So this gives us a bit of an idea of the word. Now I'm going to click on the next one. Okay, and we're in Acts 7:21. This is Stephen's sermon. And after he had been set outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and nurtured him as her own son. It's chatting about Moses. Now, when it says set outside, what happened to Moses?
He was cast into a basket, wasn't he, and then thrown down.
That's right, exactly. So with the semantic range, when it says the word expose, it means like that. Getting a baby, exposing him out to the elements, right? So now here's what's interesting. This is the book of Acts. We've just found two different usages of a word in the book of Acts, which just goes to show you can't just say, well, Paul uses this word this way, therefore it means such and such. Because here you've got two different meanings. Now, someone could stop here and say, well, obviously what they did with Apollos was they hooded him up and put him out in the desert. That's what it means. It means to expose. They've done that. But the context don't really suggest that. And we're going to go on the next verse, Acts 11:4. But Peter began speaking and proceeded to explain to them in orderly sequence, saying. Now here you got Peter explaining his dealings with the Gentiles to the church. He's explaining what happened. So we're getting to understand this word explain a bit more deeply here. And notice Peter isn't putting any babies in the river either. When we click on the next instance, we get back to Acts 18:26. So we're getting an idea of what it means. Now, we could look it up in the Septuagint. Now, you can't do that in eSword. You've got a Septuagint, but it's not numbered with these same numbers. Hopefully in the future they're put away you can do it. So I'm just going to show you some other software. This is, for a PC, this is the business when it comes to the Greek and Hebrew languages. It's called BibleWorks, about 200 quid. It's different to Logos. It doesn't have loads of commentaries on it, but for languages, it really is the one. Now, if we're looking up this word in the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, you got Esther 3:14, and the copies of the letter were published. This is ektithemi. Okay, so the word here means published. Esther 4:3, and in every province where the letters were published. Then Esther 4:8, and he gave him the copy of the writing that was published. Now, we're not going to go through every instance in the Septuagint and in the Apocrypha, but just interesting to see. Here we got the word meaning to publish something. So you're getting a bit more understanding. Septuagint it's debatable when it was written, but Jesus quoted from the Septuagint, so it was written before Jesus was on the scene. So the Greek language, you can rely more on the Septuagint than you would on classical Greek. Yeah.
You say the word I forget the name.
Ektithemi.
Ektithemi means
Ektithemi.
publish as well, just because the translators have decided to translate that word into publish in the English. To my mind, that doesn't seem to add up to saying that that's what the word meant, because there may be some sort of interpretive measure taken there just to explain. Because
well, let me explain about the Septuagint. Okay, this is quite important. It's a good question. The Septuagint was Greek, okay? Now what they're doing, they're getting the Hebrew words and they're translating them into Greek because the Jews stopped speaking Hebrew for a while. So they're like, we need a Bible in our language, so they put it into Greek. There are some wacky stories about Alexander the Great getting 70 dudes in different cells and that, but that's just crazy. And they all came up with exactly the same translation. But so what you do, you look at the New American Standard beneath, which is a translation from the Hebrew, and you see it's the word published. Now, if you look it up in the Hebrew, and we can do that, but we don't have time to do it today. But like in my software here, we can look up the word in the Hebrew and see it blatantly means published. So then when we look at the Septuagint, what we're seeing is that the guys who wrote the Septuagint, they looked at the Hebrew word, which meant published, and they were like, what Greek word best explains this? And they chose the word ektithemi. So it's a very good question because it shows I probably should have explained that a minute ago. So what we see is the guys who did the Septuagint were like, ektithemi really explains the word publish well, so we're going to use that word. So that's how it helps us looking at the Septuagint. So let's move on quick because I want to get you guys doing this yourselves. Right. If you go back to the context of Acts 18:16, because it's the immediate context you're looking at, we find that Apollos is preaching, but he doesn't know all the facts, does he? Sorry, Acts 18:26. Apollos doesn't know all of the facts. So they take him aside and they explain the way of God to him more accurately. Now, if you look at your Bauer definition on your lexicon handout there, look at his second definition. It says to convey information by careful elaboration, to explain, to expound. It's got a few funny words there. And then it says CP full stop. That means compare. Okay? It says compare or fill someone in on something. Do you all see that? So Bauer is saying that this verb here, ektithemi, is filling someone in on something. Now that is very helpful because we look at the context and that makes a lot of sense. This guy's preaching, they're not exposing him in the desert or chucking him in the water. What they're doing is they're filling him in on the gaps. They're saying, you know what, you're saying some good stuff here, but there's some crucial information you don't know about the life of Jesus. So we need to tell you about that in the life of Jesus. Now, check it out, right? If we tried to do, well, first, what's the next step in a word study? Check a commentary, right? So we go to our commentaries and we look at what Robinson word pictures say. And he says more carefully, because that's like Ephraim said, we want to look at other words there. More carefully, it would be a good thing to do a word study on. It says here, more accurately than he already knew. Instead of abusing the young and brilliant preacher for his ignorance, they, and he says particularly Priscilla, gave him the fuller story of the life and work of Jesus and of the apostolic period to fill in the gaps in his knowledge. So there we got, he actually says to fill up the gaps. So you got a guy like Robertson using a similar phrase. So me, I would feel quite comfortable in a paraphrase that I'm making of this to say that they filled him in. They filled him in on the gaps in his knowledge. Now, we're not going to make any conclusions from this, but I just say it's interesting from both sides of the debate. Do you feel you learned something doing that exercise, apostasia? Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to show you how I would do it quickly. I'd really like to hear what you guys got from it, but we're not going to have enough time. We're already going to have to, something we was going to do today, we're going to have to do next week. We're going to look at some ancient manuscripts, but we'll do that next week. Right, I just want to show you, the verse we're looking at is 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. Now, I do my word search for this word apostasia, which I've got here at the bottom. And I get these words here. Now, if you was using eSword, you would have noticed all you've got is 2 verses in the New Testament, innit? You've got Acts 21:21, where it says, and they have been told about you that you are teaching all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. Now, when you did your semantic range, what were the words you came up with? Forsake, defection, abandon, unfaithfulness, falling away. Okay, got all these words here. Now, when we look in the immediate context, it says it will not come unless the apostasy comes first. Now, who can tell me what in the context, what is he saying will not come unless the apostasy comes first? The day of the Lord. Okay, everyone agree with that? Right, okay, so in the context, you're like, well, what is it? We know the apostasy can't be the day of the Lord, because he wouldn't be saying, now, the day of the Lord will not happen until the day of the Lord happens. You know, which is a big problem with the idea that apostasy means rapture. Because Wiley said, don't worry, you haven't missed the rapture. The rapture won't happen until the rapture happens. Okay, Paul, what do you mean? But doing an inductive Bible study, we wouldn't have even come to the conclusion it means rapture yet anyway, because was it in anyone's semantic range? No. Okay. So we'll come to that in a minute, why some people think it means rapture. So we look in the context here, we're still not too sure what it means. Then we go to Acts 21:21, and we get about the idea here of telling Gentiles to forsake the laws of Moses and to not bother getting circumcised. So we start getting an idea, thinking about our semantic range, the idea of rebelling against something, abandoning something. Now, if you were able to do a word search on the Septuagint as well, then you see we've got the same word used in Joshua 22:22, which they use the word in the translation of the Septuagint. It uses the word apostasy, but if you look at the New American Standard Version, where they're translating from the Hebrew and not from the Septuagint, they say they're rebellion. Okay, so we're getting an idea of the meaning here, and we can see it down here. En apostasia, in rebellion. Okay, so that's Joshua. Then we go to 2 Chronicles. This thing keeps popping up. And then we've got Bible Works crashing, which I think is because I'm running it in this 800 by 600 resolution, which is not good for any Bible software, but to get it on the projector, I have to do that. If you have Bauer, you will have all these verses in there anyway, the Joshua one and all that. But what we find, when we look it up in the Septuagint, the word means abandoning something, rebelling against something. I think that's the clearest meaning you get from it, is rebelling. Rebelling. So you look up all these words, then you look again at it in context. It does seem quite clear. It's saying there's going to be a great rebellion. You wonder what it's going to be. Sorry, I haven't got anything good for you to see on the screen here at the moment. Let me get the word up here again. Here we go. 2 Chronicles 29. There it's got it translated as unfaithfulness from the Hebrew word, that the Septuagint writers looked at this Hebrew word and said, this is best translated by the Greek word apostasia. Okay, the word for unfaithfulness. And like I was showing some people when you're doing the practical, 2 Chronicles 29:19, with Bible Works software, you can go to verse 19. Whoops, I didn't want to do that, did I? You can go to verse 19. Okay. Maybe this was not a good idea. Anyway, you can go to verse 19, see the Hebrew word behind it, and that just helps you in your studies. I'm not going to go there to save time. But so we see rebellion. Now, what's the next stage of our word search? Check a comment. Did anyone check a commentary? There you go. Yeah, we look in Robertson's, and what do you get? There you go. It's talking about Plutarch, talking about that word for political revolt, yeah? What we're finding here is that in the commentary, it's giving references here to political revolt, apostasy from Judaism to Hellenism, and rebellion against the Lord. It's quite safe to say this is talking about an out-and-out rebellion against God. Whether you're seeing that as Jews doing it or you're seeing it as Christians doing it, that would be further study, but it's a blatant rebellion. Now, the reason why some people say apostasia means the rapture is because in some classical Greek writings, the word is used for departure, in some. But there's a big problem with that. Classical Greek was a few hundred years before Paul wrote this. And so you remember, you've got to keep it at the phrase you find the verse in. Then you look in the verse, then you look in the chapter, then you look in the book, then you look in the New Testament. Next, you look at the Septuagint and stop there. Unless you know Greek really well, it's not worth going to classical Greek because you're going to get on a whole red herring because words change their meanings over time. We're going to do an example of that now. I'm going to stick to eSword. This is the second practical, but we're going to do it all together. I realised that was hard work. Is anyone's brain hurting? Yeah, well, that's good. That shows you're a human being. Good. Your brain will hurt, but you're also like pumping weights with your brain right now. You're going to be brainier tomorrow morning when you're at church. Right. Words change over meaning. We see that with the King James Bible. There's over 300 words in the King James English that now have a completely different meaning to what they meant before. Suffer the little children. Suffer mean to come to me. It means permit the children to come to me. It doesn't mean beat your kids on Sunday morning so they go to church. Okay, that's not what it means. And the same thing can happen with classical Greek and Koine Greek. Different meanings. Now, this example we're going to look at now kind of shows that, but it also shows why it's good when you're studying to not rely on one translation. If you notice on that CD-ROM by Bill Mounts, this guy is using all kinds of different translations, and I found that's consistent with Bible scholars. They're using a bunch of translations. I know there's one guy, I've got a book of his over there, James White. He carries an NIV around with him, and he carries a Greek text with him. Because he's like, hey, if I want word for word, I got my Greek here. But if I want to see some nuances in the text that I might not get myself when I translate it word for word, I have my NIV so I can see, they translate it that way. Oh, interesting. That kind of thing. There's some guys who do that, but you'll see a lot of the scholars go into different translations. And what Bill Mounts was saying is, don't be like, this one's wrong and this one's right. Don't do the thing that happens in Bible studies. So yours means that and yours means that. Isn't the word of God wonderful? All these different meanings from the text. This is great. Instead of doing that, say, okay, how can we bring them together? Why do there seem to be these different meanings? Let's try and bring them together. And by doing that, you get a better understanding of the text. So if you turn now in Esau to 2 Timothy and then 2:15. Okay. Now, let's check it out in New American Standards. You can see on my screen it says, be diligent to present yourself approved to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, accurately handling the word of truth. Okay, now it says be diligent. Now check it out in the King James. What does it say? Probably know this off by heart, most of you. Study to show thyself approved. Yeah. Now, that's different, isn't it? One's saying study, one's saying be diligent. Okay, now to save time, I'll tell you. In 1611, study meant be eager. It didn't mean study. And you can look that up. That's not a Duncan thing. That's just a factual thing. Look it up in an old Oxford Dictionary and you'll see that it says that. Look it up in a new Oxford Dictionary. Study means hitting the books. Okay, now check it out, right? This is where knowing a bit of Greek is really helpful. Because what you can do, you can go to that word study, and next to it is the number 4704, right? Click on that. And now go to your dictionary and see what Strong says. Spoudadzo. Now, check it out. Look at the Greek wording, because what I want you guys to do, when you're doing word searches, look at the Greek word and practice pronouncing it. Notice it's spoudadzo. There's a D with the Z for the zeta, yeah? So it's not spoudazo, but it's spoudadzo. And one of the nice things about Strong's is they'll give you a little phonetic pronunciation there. Spoudadzo, so you can practice it. And he says it means to use speed. That is to make effort, to be prompt or earnest, right? And then you've got the way it's translated, to give diligence, be diligent, endeavor, labor, study. Okay, now, what we do with our word study is then we go back to our Bible and we now do a word search, 4704, right click on it, go to quick search in the pop-up window, and then click on New Testament. And we've got all these verses here. And what I recommend in this situation, you start off in 2 Timothy, because this is the letter Paul's writing here. So he says, study to show yourself approved. Then the next one, 2 Timothy 4:9, do thy diligence to come shortly unto me. I have great difficulty with the King James, so I'm actually going to cancel my search and go into the NASB. I have difficulty understanding the language. It doesn't offend me or anything, I just don't understand it. Be diligent, right. New Testament, okay. 2 Timothy got, be diligent to present yourself approved to God. Then chapter 4, verse 9, make every effort to come to me soon. What does it say in the King James? Diligent, because, and it's one thing where we get to understand the word, but it doesn't mean study the books. He's not saying hit the books to come to me soon, because you've got to study how to build an aeroplane and fly over to me. He's saying make every effort. Then verse 21, make every effort to come before winter. Now these are all in the same letter of Timothy. Okay, but you do sometimes get different meanings. But note, study in King James times did not mean hit the books. And then you can keep doing a study of every time this word's used, and you do the same procedure we done before. Now, I'm not saying that the verse we're looking at doesn't mean that part of this isn't studying. It clearly is, but I'm just saying often when we quote this verse, and I've quoted it many times, study to show yourself approved. And I've thought of it as meaning hit the books to show yourself approved. But it doesn't. It means be eager to show yourself approved. Make haste, hurry up about it, be diligent about it, work hard at it, make every effort to do it. And part of that is studying the scriptures. But it's not all studying the scriptures, because there's loads of liberal scholars out there that are making every effort studying the scripture, but they're not showing themselves approved to God. So that's one reason why it's good to check other translations. Now, how much time we got? Okay. What we were going to do is look up the word dokimazo in 1 John 4:1, where he says, test the spirits. We don't have time to do it. But I'll tell you something interesting. When you check out that word dokimazo, when he says test the spirits, you find the same verse, the same word used for someone checking out their oxen. So you get to see that this verse is used in a way of like, if you go to buy a car, you check it out, isn't it? Especially second-hand car. You want to check out if it's working okay. You're like, is this car genuine? And this is the same verb that God uses to tell us, that Paul uses, obviously God's doing it as well, to tell us to test the spirits. It doesn't just mean like, maybe that's okay. It means you're actually like, is this a genuine prophecy? Is this guy for real? And really testing it. And it's actually a command in the grammar as well. It's an imperative. So it's not, hey, if you think about testing this, test it. It's like, you have to do it. It's part of your Christian mandate. So we were going to do that. We ain't got time. What we're going to do now is Ephesians 4:26. This is the last thing we're doing, and then we finish for the day, and you can give all your brains a rest. Now, you can get, on the CD-ROM you're getting later today, in a minute, you're going to get the free version of Net Bible for eSword. There's a downside to it. It only gives you notes on the first 3 verses of every chapter. I would encourage you to get the full version for $20 from Bible.org. It will support their ministry, and if you go on that website, you see what those guys are doing is good. They wanted to get a Bible. They wanted to get the NIV and put it on the internet so people in all countries around the world could use it for free. And they were told this is how much it would cost to do that. And a bunch of scholars like Dan Wallace from Dallas Theological Seminary said, you know what, we could do a translation for you for much less money than that. And so this millionaire guy paid them to do a translation, and they've just done it for free. You can copy it, quote it as much as you want, no copyright. And the notes that come with it are incredible. So whenever they make a paraphrase, because they feel it's helpful, they then in the notes tell you that the Greek more literally says this, and they chose a paraphrase because of this. They give you stuff about Greek grammar, and it's wonderful.
Is that every verse?
Yeah. I suggest getting it, but you can use this free version as well, which will be on your CD-ROM, that doesn't go in eSword, but works like this. The only downside is the layout. Now, what I want to show you is the benefit of looking at different translations. If we go at Ephesians 4:26, can you see it there? Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on the cause of your anger. Now, does that sound different to anyone from what you're used to memorizing?
Yeah.
Yeah, do not let the sun go down on your wrath, or do not let the sun go down on your anger. These guys are saying, do not let the sun go down on the cause of your anger. So you're like, well, hang on a minute. Why is it different? Now, some people, and a lot of us have gone through this in our lives, we're just like, this ain't my favorite translation, so this is wrong. You know, my favorite translation is such and that is the right one, blah, blah, blah. What's healthy to do is be like, hang on a minute. All the other translators say, don't let the sun go down on your anger. These cats are saying, don't let it go down on the cause of your anger. I want to check it out. I'm going to do a word study. And so that's what we do. We go to Ephesians. Now, that word for anger there, the number next to it is 3950. Has everyone got that number there? 3950. When you've got it, yeah, that's right. It's two different angers. Go to the last one at the end where it says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Or if you're using King James, it will say wrath. Now, you look it up in Strong's. What's the semantic range? Just says rage or wrath. New American Standard says irritation, and they got it translated as anger. That's kind of frustrating. You're like, well, is that makes me angry? Yeah. Go to Zodi80's word study. If you can buy that for a few dollars. There it says to make angry, provoke to violent or bitter anger, exasperation or anger to which one is provoked. Then you think, okay, that's interesting. Then it says, it's got these two words for anger, and it says they're both translated wrath. They are not the same in meaning. On the one hand, paragismos signifies the kind of severe violent anger which arises from direct provocation and aroused anger or seething exasperation. So here, notice the word provocation. Okay, interesting, but what we're going to do a word search so that we can really see it for sure. Now, I am going to go into Power Bible for this because we're going to have to go into Septuagint. I'll show you why, but see if you can do it in eSword if you want.
You said you're going to go into Power Bible?
I meant to say Bible Works. Sorry, there's a big difference between the two. Okay, here we go. Ephesians 4:26. When I do my word search, which I did earlier to save time, there's only one New Testament usage of this word. Okay, so in this case, we are going to go to the Septuagint. Very interesting what we find now. 1 Kings 15:30. For the sins of Jeroboam, who led Israel into sin, even by his provocation. That is how this Greek word's translated there. It's not by his anger, it's provocation. Then 2 Kings 19:3. And remember, if you had a copy of Bauer, you would be able to see all these references and look them up in eSword, if you bought Bauer. 2 Kings 19:3. And they said to him, thus says Ezekiel, this day is a day of tribulation and rebuke and provocation. Okay. 2 Kings 23:26. Nevertheless, the Lord turned not from the fierceness of his great anger, wherewith he was wroth in his anger against Judah, because of the provocations wherewith Manasseh provoked him. The way they translate the Septuagint is hard to follow, but you can see the words in blue, provocation. Nehemiah. Nehemiah 9:18. And still farther, they even made to themselves a molten calf and said, these are the gods that brought us out of Egypt, and they wrought great provocations. Getting an idea of how this word's used in the Septuagint. A few verses later in 26, and they wrought great provocations. Then we got an apocryphal book here, Psalm of Solomon's, in secret underground places where there are outrageous transgressions of the law, son involved with mother and father with daughter. There it's translated the word outrageous. You can obviously see the link there with it being a provocative transgression, because he's saying this is disgusting what's going on here. Jeremiah 21:5. Now here you've just got it, the word anger. And I will fight against you with an outstretched hand and with a strong arm, with wrath and great anger. So here you're like, well, here it is just anger. But what kind of anger is it?
Great.
Great anger, and it's been provoked. Do you know what I mean? So, on the whole, most of the words there are to do with provocation. So then what we do is crash again. I really don't like this. We look at the context of Ephesians 4:26, and we say, okay, what is it? Now, this is interesting. When I first found this, I'd always wondered why this verse was in the middle of it. Because when I looked at Ephesians, I taught on it just over a year ago, and everything seems to go nice and cool, and then suddenly there's this, in your anger do not sin. And there's a bunch of sins talked about, and then it says in your anger do not sin, and then it says don't let the sun go down on your anger. And we always take it to mean, okay, if you have beef with someone, say sorry to them before you go to bed. This is what a community called the Pythagorean community used to do. That was their philosophy, and so this is what it means. Now, I'm not saying it don't mean that, but as I did this word study, I got to understand where the Net Bible guys were coming from. They're saying, well, I'm jumping the gun. Before I say what Net Bible guys are saying, when you look at the context, right, the paragraph is talking about sin in the church and how sin has to stop. And the context to me, and I could be wrong, but the context to me says that this is saying that you have to deal with sin in the church. That he's saying, in your anger, don't sin. When you're angry about these guys that are sinning in the church, don't sin. Don't put it off, but deal with the cause of your provocation. In other words, church leaders go to bed at night thinking, I've forgiven that brother. If that guy is sleeping with his mother-in-law, then you need to deal with it. Don't let the sun go down until you've dealt with the reason for why you've been provoked to anger. And the reason is all the sin that's going on in the church. Now, it's debatable, but it's a very good example of a word search. And because this word is only used once in the New Testament, you could see why a lot of people have just translated it as anger. But then the Net Bible guys have come along and they've said, well, hang on a minute. Whenever we find it used, it's about provocation. Now, what I want you to do now is go to your copy of the Net Bible, which hopefully you got an icon on your desktop now. And I'll just show you how this works with it. If you can't get it up, then just watch what we're doing on the screen. Where it says, do not let the sun go down on the cause of your anger, you see there's little numbers there. It says 33. That's a footnote, right? Now, this is where the Net Bible really comes alive. You click on it, and at the bottom, we've got some notes. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to make that bigger. Now, if you buy the version in eSword, this comes up much more attractively because it comes up in eSword. And it says, the word paragismos, typically translated anger in most versions, is used almost exclusively of the source of anger rather than the results in Greek literature. Thus, it refers to an external cause or provocation rather than an internal reaction. The notion of cause of your anger, quote unquote, is both lexically and historically justified. And then it goes through some stuff there, but you get the basic idea. Now, this is what I really like about the Net Bible. They will give you their reasons. You can read it and then say, I still don't agree with it. The other thing that's nice about the Net Bible is they don't care what previous translations have done. Now, when you hear translators talk, you find out that when they make a decision, some of it's based on politics. There's stories of translators saying, we want to translate the verse this way. And the translation company saying, if you do that, we won't publish it. There's stories that you can listen to Rob Stein, who's one of the leading guys on hermeneutics and other stuff on biblicaltraining.org. He talks about the day that the New King James translators came to his seminary to give a talk on the New King James when it just come out in the 80s. And he says, now this is secondary information, but you can check it out for yourself. He says that one of the questions they asked him was, why did you put in 1 John 5:7-8? And the answer he says he was given, now this is the answer he says he was given, okay, so I want to point out, this is secondary information, was that the translators of the New King James didn't want to put it in. But the publishing company said, you have to put it in. If you want it to be published, you've got to put it in. Now, there's many stories of publishing companies saying, everyone has always heard this verse said a certain way, and you're saying you want to translate it differently? And the translators are like, yeah, but we feel the word really means this. And they're like, it's not going to sell. We want it to sell on the bookshelf, you translate it this way. Now, Net Bible got a completely different philosophy. It was done for a different purpose. They're not selling it. If you buy the leather-bound copy, you buy. So there's a lot of verses where you expect them to say, fight the good fight and stuff, and they translate it a different way. And you read it and you wince because you're like, that's not what I grew up hearing. But then you read their notes and you're like, So that's something that's nice about the Net Bible. I let you make your own conclusions about it. I'm not trying to sell it, but I do think the notes that come with it are a wonderful resource.